You guys have really kind of played with a lot of the archetypes that
Sure.
The Archie comics are based around. So like, how much fun has that been to be kind of do this like exaggerated like subversion of like the basket case or the
It's great. I mean, it's funny when we were first doing the research for the show. It's Archie Comics in very many ways is, because it's such a long-lived property, is responsible for those archetypes that were later taken off with and became kind of the stereotypes of not just teen dramas, but all kinds of mixed media. And I think for us to be able to use those original ones and amplify them to a degree to not necessarily make them caricatures, but to do something of that sort, I think it's a blast. We have the tremendous luxury of having 75 years of source material to pull off of, which is something that almost no production gets. And it really puts us in a unique place to poke fun at it and acknowledge what it is and simultaneously take it really seriously. I think for me the most enjoyable part is that, and Jughead specifically, because he's probably the most different from the comics than the rest of the core four. We get to take these characters and make fun of them in a sort of meta sense, but when we are the characters and we're in the town, everything is taken so damn seriously. Maple syrup can become a bad guy, and I think to me that's a blast. It's always really fun. But can you imagine having to say jingle jangle on screen over and over again? I think we didn't stop laughing about that for the first 4 episodes.
Have you heard the Jingle Jangle song?
Yes, of course. I mean, the first thing we all did when we read Jingle Jangle was go, Roberto, what the hell is this? And he sent us, this classic twisty 70s drug trippy Jingle Jangle song. So it all made sense.
For Jug, one of the things that you've got coming up is kind of taking on, as you alluded to, the role of FP.
Right.
How important is that to him, being able to kind of fulfill what his father was doing?
I think in many ways the kids in the town are all reflections of their parents, and are kind of these ghost-like images of their parents. And even when we start to learn the parents' story in season 1, we see that someone like FP was forced or made some mistakes that Jughead is either stumbling into blindly or trying to acknowledge. And I think for Jughead has a tremendous yearning for the approval of his father, who was probably not there too much when he was a kid. He's a kid whose mom is not around. He's a kid that takes his childhood friendships super, super seriously, and it's all about the kind of purity and moral rightness of whatever person is making the bad decisions that they're making. And I think he sees the potential for greatness in his father, and he sees the potential for greatness in himself, and he's slowly but surely realizing that there are a lot of different shades to good and bad, and that his father is definitely sitting right around the middle of that, and what that might mean for Jughead. In that way, we have Luke Perry's character, who's very morally righteous. And Archie is a specter of that moral righteousness as well, sort of a lawful good. And then we have Jughead sitting on that spectrum and trying to figure out what part of that spectrum he sits on, and if he leans either way, and it's definitely a shade of his father. And if his father can end up influencing him towards either direction, that's yet to be said.
Do you want to get on to the postmortem?
Yeah, I have a postmortem
even
question.
though-
Yeah. When you first got this role, did you ever think you'd be filming a scene where a bunch of people are kicking the crap out of you?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, really?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's funny. When I first read the first couple episodes through this narrative arc, I was like, Jughead is such a pompous little kid, thinking he can go into a brand new school, do whatever the hell he wants, and then when someone tells him no, he goes, well, my dad is your leader. I think that kid deserves to get his butt kicked a little bit, I think. You know, and I think Jughead needs to toughen up if he's going to survive whatever the hell is about to be thrown at him. And I think this is a really good way to not only build the camaraderie with the people who have been beaten up by the North Side, but to really toughen Jughead up simultaneously. I don't know, I thought it was awesome. I'm really glad it wasn't as cold filming that as it is right now.
Yeah.
When Archie breaks up with Jughead for Betty, it seems like Jughead is kind of expecting it. Was that part of your performance?
Part of it, definitely. I mean, I think there's that one line in it too that he goes, "No, you guys haven't been good," and he's trying to lie to himself, and he goes like, "No, I saw her earlier. I forget what it was."
Mm-hmm.
But he knows he's on the South Side now, and he knows he's been away from everyone. And I think also Jughead has absolutely no problem seeing himself as someone who could be easily thrown to the wayside. So I think something like that probably affects him a little bit. But he's also got his boys behind him, so it's not like he's going to be like, no! Which is, the way that scene was shot was kind of funny to me, watching it back. But it's, it's one of those interesting. I think Archie is also Jughead's weakness when it comes to Betty, because they were kind of the three amigos when they were young, but Betty had always favored Archie. And it's something that will definitely see prevalence later on in the season. And just how much of a friendship Betty and Jughead had, even though it was just the three of them when they were younger, or if Jughead felt more like a third wheel. So Archie coming to deliver the bad news is not only a slap from Betty, but really a slap from Archie too, which I think is something we explore a lot later.
Jughead's really involved with what's happening with the serpents and on the South Side, and Betty has the Black Hood that she's
Right.
dealing with. Is there going to be some regret from him that he wasn't there for her through
Definitely.
her issues?
I mean, not to spoil too much, but we do play with a bit of that this episode. I mean, but Jughead's narrative arc is really, much like the last season, is a slow burn. It's the first half of this season for Jughead is like establishing the world that is the South Side, with the inevitable kind of civil war between the North and the South, in which Jughead's narrative becomes a lot more prevalent. In the same way, first season, he was kind of on the outskirts, and slowly but surely we learned more about him. So there's not really much Jughead can do. He's kind of stretched as thin as possible right now, not only trying to fight for the freedom of his father, trying to contain the serpent's inclination for violence, and also dealing with his own personal demons. And I think he'll end up regretting quite a bit that he wasn't around for Betty, but I don't think Jughead thinks Betty can't take care of herself, which I think is an important. I don't think any of the four characters that are going through the troubles at any point have been like, "Whoa, is this kid in over his head?" I think they'll find the agency and they'll work it out and they'll move on.
Now, in 4, we saw, it seemed like Jughead was easily misleading Betty.
Yeah.
With what happens at the end of 205 with Toni, is that going to be a problem for him going forward?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's interesting. When I first read how Jughead was going to interact with that, I had read it like he just kept brushing Toni off, continuously brushing Toni off. And then I thought it would be more interesting if he didn't, and he was actually somewhat interested or enjoyed the admiration of another young woman, which I think is quintessentially a teenager. That's the most teenage thing to do. Whether or not Jughead wants to admit it, he enjoys that attention, which is a kind of attention he's only ever received from Betty, and never really has that kind of attention specifically. So when this new girl in a place where he knows nobody else starts paying attention to him, I don't necessarily even think it's sexual, so to speak. I think even if it's platonic, it's something that's brand new, uncharted territory for him, and he feels excited by it. I think he would feel excited by it.
I'm going to jump over now to 206 for preview questions 3 maybe 4 until we move on.
We saw some like connections to like the Zodiac killer. So are we going to see other like real life murder investigations kind of brought into the narrative?
Well, that's not really for me to say, as the actor. But I think, I think a lot of people really, really enjoy the kind of mystery aspect of the show, the amateur sleuthing between Betty and Jughead. In the first season, it was much more murder mystery, and in this season, genre-wise, it takes a much more horror tone. We don't know the conclusion based on where you guys are right now of the Black Hood narrative, but I think because it's such an enjoyed part of the show, it would be hard for me to think that Betty and Jughead would stop doing something like that.
So in episode 6,
It's Drag Race? Yeah.
yeah, it's the drag race one, but there's really, once they find out what happened with Nick and Cheryl, the parents, the adults in the town really sort of declare war on the
Right.
south side. So what can you tell us about how Jughead gets drawn into that and the drag race and what have you?
Well, I mean, I think the South Side has always kind of been a straw man for the North Side. Like, it takes a lot of the flack just because it's the easiest victim to point at, which is something that we continuously talk about until the eventual culmination of basically a civil war. And I think because institutionally the South Side is an area where a lot of that stuff is forced to take place, people see that as the very first source of that trouble and that drama, and eventually the North Side just says, we don't want this blemish on our town anymore, and how are we going to end up dealing with this? But I think they've always been the fall guy, and Jughead realizes that they're the fall guy, and Jughead, because he's got a foot on the North and the South Side, has to figure out a way to mediate that, which is kind of the continued narrative.
How much of it is deserved though? Because it's not like
From the
they're,
South?
yeah, I mean, they're not blameless, they're doing
Totally.
some bad stuff.
I mean, I think for Jughead and for the South Side, the point is that these bad decisions that are being made are because of a kind of institutional violence that forces their hand, which is what often happens in the real world in those kind of situations, is that the institutions force the hands of the people who don't have the agency to do otherwise, and so crime does take place, but it's justified crime in some strange way. And that's kind of what Jughead ends up discovering about the South Side, is that the reasons people have had to do these things are matters of survival, not so much like a kind of cliched, I just want to do bad. Which is funny because episode 6 has a character who's like, chaos, baby. I love his character.
Last question.
I was gonna ask, at the end of episode 5, it would seem that with the breakup and the kiss of Toni, that Jughead's relationships with Archie and Betty are pretty damaged.
Right.
What can you say going into episode 6, what fans can expect of those dynamics?
I think, they're also young kids, older teens. I mean, I think they fight, they make up, they fight, they make up, and they fight and they make up. And I think nothing so serious has happened between these kind of impenetrable 75-year-old relationships that Jughead's going, I don't want to see your damn faces anymore. But he also, episode 6 is one of those scenarios where he has to recruit the help of these people that he doesn't really want to turn to. And he'd like to handle it himself, but he can't. No man is an island, and especially not Jughead, so